Apologies for that, folks. I had a little technical difficulty sharing my screen, but that's now resolved. So welcome to the November OpenNTF webinar. My name is Graham Akers, and I'm the chairman of OpenNTF. With me today, we have Roberto Bocadero and Jesse Gallagher from the board, and our presenter is Heiko Voigt, also from the board. So because we're a couple of minutes behind, let's just get jumping right in here and get rolling. So yeah, so just a couple of quick words before we get going. Then Heiko's going to do his presentation, and of course, as per usual, we'll follow up with Q&A. Yeah, so as our standard thank you slide, as we mention every month, HCL supports OpenNTF, and we appreciate their support certainly, as well as Prominic donating all the IT-related services. So just a quick thank you to both of those organizations for their ongoing support of OpenNTF. And also our standard comment about the fact that we're open source, and what open source really means is that anybody can contribute anything and share what they know, and it all helps us in the community. So if you've got something that you'd like to share, or even a question that you'd like to ask, by all means, reach out to us. We're on Discord, and we'll have some information about that here coming up. But by all means, if you're interested, reach out to us and join us and share with the rest of the community. We all learn when everybody shares. Quick note about next month, we won't be having a normal webinar. We are going to have a happy hour, which we've done now at least once, maybe twice. Plan the date for Thursday, December 15th. We'll have more information on the website as we get closer to with links. But this is basically going to be about an hour long in sort of the three geos around the world, so that people aren't having to join a happy hour at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we'll get those details put together, but this is just really an opportunity for everyone in the community to join up and say hi, and wish everybody some holiday cheer before we take a break at the end of the month. I also want to, and I'm very happy to announce that we are going to actually host a couple of repair cafes in January. And the concept here is that you can just show up to a chat and bring a question or an idea or a problem or a tip, something to share with the community or something that you'd like to get solved, and we'll have people in the Repair Cafe chat room to be able to talk through whatever question or challenge that you've got or idea that you've got, and we'll kind of make these an ongoing thing. So we're going to take a stab at it to begin with, and see how they go, see what kind of feedback we get on them. The first thing we want to do is to plug some ideas into our suggestion box on Discord, and we'll take it from there. So we've scheduled January 12th for development related topics and January 25th for admin related topics, and they can be any kind of admin, Domino connection, same time, take your pick, same on the development side. But bring your ideas and let's just see if we can create a little bit of momentum. The idea that we want to follow is that we hold this kind of opposite our webinars, and make it much less formal, more of an opportunity to just get problems solved and spread the word and see if we can, as I said, build some momentum. So those are our first two dates. Again, we'll have more details on the website as we get closer. All right, last note before we get going. We're going to hold questions till the end. So use the panel here for asking questions as it shows. And the idea is that we want to make sure that we have those questions and answers recorded in the audio of the webinar. And then depending on whether we get through them or not, we'll also post them in a blog. And of course, the very first question that always gets asked is this going to be recorded, and are the slides going to be available? And the standard answer is always yes. We have a YouTube channel, and we also have a webinars page that lists all of our previous webinars, including links to the YouTube page, the presentation, and any Q&A. And with that, I am going to switch over to Heiko to be the presenter. So I'm going to stop my screen. And Heiko, you should be able to take it away.
Yep. So we've seen all that, and this is where we start. So welcome from my side. Couple words about me. As Graham mentioned, I'm a new member of the board, and as that, I'm a bit nervous to do my first OpenNTF presentation today. So bear with me that everything's going as smooth as I expected to go, but yeah, well, you never know. We got some demos, so there might be some glitches and breaks, so we'll see about that. For those of me who don't know me, I'm also one of the old farts in the community. I'm more than 25 years on my tab list with Nodes and Domino. I'm currently mostly working as a full stack web developer, mostly in the JavaScript environments, so Node.js and the likes. I'm an HCL ambassador, and well, the rest of the stuff I think you can read on the chart or check out later if you like. So let's head on over to what we're doing about today. I don't have a big agenda. I will walk you through Keycloak and why I think Keycloak is a great match for Domino and also the rest of the HCL Digital Solutions portfolio to solve a lot of trouble and inconsistencies that I see across the board regarding authentication authorization. HCL has done a lot of work in the last couple of months and years to get better in the Domino world with web single sign-on capabilities. But from my perspective, a lot of my customers are asking for more generalized solutions or integrated solutions. And while a lot of them are working with things like Azure AD and the Microsoft scenarios, some of them also are thinking out of the box and say, okay, so what else is on the market? What can I do if I want to have things on premises, if I don't want to use cloud solutions and stuff like that? And Keycloak is and that's why I think it's great when we're here in an open source community. It's an open source project and offers a lot of stuff and brings, I think, a lot of features and functions to the table that makes your life as a Domino administrator and a Domino application developer a lot easier, and that's what I want to cover today. So we'll hear a lot about things like OAuth and OpenID Connect. We'll talk about SAML, and the things that we cover, or that I will cover today, are we're going to take a look at the Keycloak and how can we use Keycloak for single sign-on authentications using SAML and OIDC against Domino, but also around the some side products or some additional products that are linked into that. So especially with the app dev pack and the new Domino REST APIs that are coming with the noob in a pretty short time. Also, there's some new capabilities coming into the noob release that allow us to do fully OIDC authentications with Domino out of the box, which is in the noob as well. We'll take a look at that as well. And also we'll take a look at how do I set up Keycloak for my standard web applications that I have on Domino, be it like Burst, be it XPages applications or standard web development applications, everything that's HTTP server based. Plus as well the new kid on the block, which is Nomad Web, which also plays very nice in that environment as well. So these are the things that are covered. There's a couple of things that I'm not going to be showing today, which is the nodes part of the integration, the SAML integration to begin to make to use Keycloak for SAML authentication for the nodes client itself. But this is working as well. So this is also a great way forward for that as well. Let's not, but I won't be demoing that today. So this will be something that we'll have to look up in the documentation of HCL. So for those of you who don't know Keycloak, so what is Keycloak? Keycloak is an identity provider solution. It's, as I said, it's an open source community project. It's hosted by Red Hat initially, or initiated by Red Hat, and most of the developers that are on the product and on the project are working for Red Hat. And it basically allows applications, no matter what applications, to authenticate against a central system, and then pass these authentication options in with the two main standards that we see out there in the market, which is OpenID Connect and SAML, to connected third-party systems, right? So to achieve that, Keycloak delivers a number of capabilities, which are also interconnectable, as we will see later on in the presentation or in the demos as well. And there's a couple of definitions or basic naming conventions that Keycloak is using that we will have to transfer into our knowledge to make use of what Keycloak is giving us. And one central piece of that is the so-called realm. And the realm, from my perspective, if I'm looking into the Domino world, to me, the most likely resemblance to that would be a Domino domain. So if you're looking at your servers that are part of a domain, they can talk to each other. They share the same organizational information, and pretty much the same thing is a realm in Keycloak. It more or less defines an organizational unit that connects application clients using the various authentication product like the two authentication protocols that Keycloak offers, and shares them between them. So a realm is an organizational definition, and it defines a couple of basic settings for a security environment. And a client in the Keycloak environment is a application that is connected to Keycloak and gets this authentication, and also the respective access tokens and relevant token capabilities from Keycloak. So this interacts with that interface. Keycloak has the ability to import users from directories, mostly LDAP directories, and Domino could be is one of the Domino LDAP task could be one of the elements that we could talk to in regards of the so-called user federation. User federation means Keycloak keeps its own user registry. So this is held into a Keycloak database. So users will get imported from an LDAP, for example, from Domino LDAP into the Keycloak user repository, and be enriched by a couple of settings and definitions that might not be in LDAP. So the Keycloak databases are more or less synchronizing everything that's hooked up through the user federation capabilities that Keycloak has. This could be one LDAP, could be several of them. You can have multiple repositories connected to one realm. You can have multiple realms that connect to different directories. So all of that is mixable and interchangeable. And to hook up all of these configurations and work with the system itself, Keycloak brings its own administrative console, which I will show you in a minute. It allows you to do all the configurations that you need to hook up the realms, the user federations, the clients, and all of the necessary configuration settings. But it also brings in its own UI components to let the user interact with each other. So when you do a login, for example, from a Domino application against a specific client, the login page will also come from Keycloak, and this can be customized as well. As literally most of anything inside of the Keycloak environment is customizable. So you can have your own UI and your own way of building these login pages and authentication pages that Keycloak will handle out to the users. So that's part of the system as well. So a lot of questions that I got when I did this presentation is, why do you think Keycloak is a great match for Domino? So we heard a lot that HCL has built in OIDC directly now into Domino. So what does it bring to the table? And I'm a big fan of separation of duty, so to speak, in my environments that I have with my customers. So I'm a bit reluctant to have every piece of security capabilities hosted in each and every product that I'm running with. I'm more of a fan of having a centralized authentication and authorization system in my architectures that I have with my customers, and then hook up the relevant system that need to talk to these authentication systems to it, and make use of a centralized way of authenticating and authorization in my organizations. So this helps me a lot. For example, if one specific product that needs to play a role within this concert doesn't support certain authentication mechanisms, protocols, or features and functions, bringing having a solution like Keycloak in front of those things streamlines the capabilities that I have for all the applications that I have hooked up to it. So it's not only a way of standardizing things and making use of a product that is heavily tested and heavily trusted in the industry for being a secure and stable product, but also it gives me the opportunity to streamline the capabilities that I have from an authentication perspective across multiple applications and multiple architectures in various ways. And Keycloak especially has been around for a pretty long time. It's one of the most active open source products that I know of, and it's has more or less been through all of the fire testing that you would expect for a authentication or an authorization solution. And it's more or less became, from a security perspective, for a lot of companies, it became the gold standard that everybody else has to be compared against from a features and function point of view, but also from a stability point of view and from a security point of view. So that speaks a little bit for itself, I think, and it's really a great solution to be able to normalize all the various web authentication issues we face in the Domino world behind one single solution that adds a lot of value to the whole environment. So is Keycloak the only thing that is capable of doing that? Surely not. I've been discussing a lot of these things with Daniel Nashid, and he has done a lot more than I did with interacting with Domino with various authentication and authorization components and IDPs per se. But Keycloak is one of the most mostly used out in the wild. That's why we got stuck with it and are pretty happy working with it. But there are other solutions as well that might be for specific implementations might be a better fit than Keycloak is even. But Keycloak is one of the things, if you can make it work, if you can get it to work with Keycloak, it's basically very standard, a very standard specific one. So you can be sure that everything that's out there regarding OIDC and SAML standard protocols is working with Keycloak. So that's a reference implementation, by the way. So if it works with Keycloak, it probably works. Your solution should probably be fine with a lot of other IDPs that are out in the market as well. So that's a quick chart about the environment that I want to talk about today. And so these are all the moving parts that we will use inside of this environment that we talk about. From the Domino backend perspective, as I said, we make use of the LDAP task to provide our user base to Keycloak. Of course, we will make use of the HTTP server. We'll also make use of DSIP filters in the HTTP server. We'll come to that in a minute. The Nomad web server is the latest addition in that environment. We hooked up in front to that. We make use of the Domino REST APIs that are also working very nicely with Keycloak from the beginning, or with an IDP per se, and our from what HCL has been positioning it, is supposed to make use of an IDP for in production. And of course, also we have we have things like the AppDev pack that are currently coming with their own implementation of an IDP. In this case, it's the IAM service that the AppDev pack brings with us. but the AppDev pack is also capable of being configured against Keycloak, so we can make use of all of these endpoints, no matter where they are, from a web perspective, using one of these two authentication mechanisms, SAML or OIDC, and in conjunction with that in this environment. So from a front-end perspective, we will be taking a look at a classic web application, which would be we'll take a look at the Domino support for in our case, an OpenNTF. We will also take a look at an XPages application. We'll take a look at two single-page applications, one talking to the Domino REST APIs and one talking to Domino through the AppDev pack. What we also have in our environments is we always have a combination of a Keycloak cluster and also a reverse proxy in front of the Domino services and the Keycloak services, which in our case is an Nginx cluster that does the reverse proxy handling, so that all of our maybe publicly available endpoints are can only be reached for a reverse proxy. And Keycloak is supporting this infrastructure as Domino does as well. In the back, yeah. So that's basically the basic environment that I want to talk about, and we'll go through all of these use cases and take a look at how they are configured in Keycloak and how this is working. And that's within the next couple of minutes. This is just for reference for those of you who are not familiar with OIDC and OAuth 2. So more or less is OAuth OIDC authorization code flow, as we see it here, is more or less defines a request sequence that goes from a user to a application. So user interacts, for example, in this case with a React application. This React application says, okay, to be able to display the data, you need to authenticate, and I need to know if you are allowed to see that resource. So the app goes to the IDP and says, okay, I have a user that requests a specific resource, and here then the IDP responds with a login screen and says, okay, can you log in so I know who you are and whether you're allowed to use that specific resource that you had to ask for. And then the user authenticates, and the IDP response then more or less to say, okay, yes, so here's to the React app, here's the token, and there's some access information in there as well. And the React app says, okay, oh well, great, yeah, so that's fine. I got my respective scopes that I need. So the user is allowed to see the data, so I'll deliver the data to the user to work with. But this is the basic OAuth dance, and this is something that we will see across the board during this presentation when we do the demos. So the basic thing that I wanted to start off with, and this is basically the SSO part in Domino that has been around for the longest time in the product, is nodes and Domino SAML configuration. There's a couple of things we need to do to make that work. This is fairly well documented in the HCL documentation and has become over time a little bit more easy to do and a little bit more trustworthy. I remember the first steps that we took about this. I think it was in 901 sometime when this first surfaced. It was highly complex to really set it up. And each and every incarnation of Domino's softened these edges a little bit. So today the process is really straightforward. And also the process is very straightforward with Keycloak to work with that. This is so there's a couple of things that we need to do. We need to have an IDP catalog, IDP cat NSF that needs to be created. Then there has to be a trust configuration established between Domino and the IDP, which is in our setting is Keycloak. We have to set up and configure a couple of HTTP settings. And we have to set up for the nodes part and stuff like that, also like a security policy in the address book. And for those of you who don't have an ID vault yet, it's becoming more and more urgent. If you want to use those kind of things in your environment, you have to have an ID vault and get it working. And then if you test those things. So just to give you a quick impression of how those things look like, this is a quick environment check that we have here. And this is a look, for example, in the IDP catalog that I have. So I have 2 Domino servers configured here against Keycloak. And all of these configuration information can be derived from Keycloak directly. So they can be imported, and also the endpoints that need to be, the service URLs that need to be entered in here. So all of that stuff can be more or less directly imported from Keycloak. So this is one of the major configuration steps that you have to take to really make this connection work with the Keycloak server. As I said, this basic information comes out of Keycloak itself, and let's take a look at how this is done in the Keycloak administrative console. So this is the administration console here, and I'm logging into that, into our test environment server. And then, as I said, this is what we see here is a round definition. So this is more or less the global scope that is defined in Keycloak that works as a organizational environment for applications connecting to this organization. And then we have our application clients. And right here, for example, we have the definitions that are here for our SAML configuration in Domino. So what the round explicitly defines, and this is what you can define here, is the endpoint. So we allow both authentication mechanisms here in this realm, OpenID Connect and SAML. This is one of the most important things to configure here. A lot more can be configured in here. I'm not going any further due to lack of time. But this is how you, for example, set up what authorization endpoints you want to support in this specific environment or in this specific setup for your organization. Why is this important? Because Keycloak has a great feature that allows you to traverse between those authentication mechanisms. So what that means, I will come back to that in a minute, but just keep in mind that for example, with these round sessions, you define what authentication mechanisms you want to support in this organization. In our case, as I said, we're still in the configuration environment for Domino with SAML, and that's what we use here. Defined the client protocol here, and then we have a couple of definitions that we have to do for Domino, and that's basically there's a couple of settings that you have to define. These are also defined in the documentation. And there's a couple of slides here as well to give you the information of how to set up this SAML client in here. As I said, there's a couple of definitions where you can access these endpoint definitions. And this, for example, is this XML definition file that you need to import into Domino. That gives you the information about your IDP or about your SAML endpoint in this specific one. So this can be directly downloaded here in this configuration right here. So with that, we go back to Domino, configure that part, and this defines the trust between Domino and Keycloak as the IDP in that specific way. Yeah, so we talked about this one here, also talked about this one here, and the next thing that I wanted to talk about is the Domino REST APIs. And the Domino REST APIs are, from a client perspective, if you look at that one here, these are OIDC. These are OIDC authenticated mechanisms. So we will leave the SAML part behind and have an OpenID Connect configuration. And the way that you do that is pretty much the same. You define a so-called client ID. That's what you need for your trusts that you have to define from the from Keep or from the REST APIs here. And also you need a so-called client secret that is also created in here. So those are two things that you need to bring back over to configure that those parts with the Domino REST APIs. And then there's a couple of settings that are also like described already in the documentation of the Domino REST APIs to on how to set those things up. As you see here, there's an exact sample in the documentation about how you work with Keycloak and the Domino REST APIs. Let's look, maybe it's time to just for a quick demo here, because now if we, as we have done that, we have two authentication mechanisms in place now. So we have the SAML authentication against web. And for example, if I use that to authenticate against my email in Verse, for example, that's what I get from that's the definition from a SAML perspective. If you look up here, then you see from this Keycloak authentication mechanism, we're using SAML as our authentication mechanism, right? So that's what you see in the URL. So that's our SAML configuration that we did a couple of minutes ago. That's the server that I've been talking to. So if I authenticate against that one, I get access to my email. And I have here another application, which is that one here. This is a single page application that is using the OIDC configuration that we did a minute ago for the Domino REST APIs. And if I look and start up that application, you see there's no login screen, right? I'm automatically authenticated against this application. How did that happen? We said this. We have a SAML authentication here against Verse. We have an OIDC connection against this application here, against this web application. Well, as I mentioned earlier, in Keycloak, there's a in this round settings we enabled both endpoints, the SAML endpoint and the OpenID Connect template. And what you can do with Keycloak is Keycloak manages user sessions when you authenticate against Keycloak with one of the two protocols, doesn't matter what. If you come in as a user that has authenticated, in our case, with a SAML authorization against Verse, you come back to Keycloak, Keycloak recognizes you and says, okay, well, I know that guy. He came in with SAML, now he's requesting an OpenID endpoint. Okay, so I will traverse those tokens right away. So I'm not asking that guy for credentials anymore because I know them already. So more or less generate the respective tokens, pass it on to the application, and the application has to decide whether the user is able to see the data that they requested. And that's exactly what happens here. So we don't get any second chance, but Keycloak automatically issues the respective tokens as it knows the user and traverses us over. So we don't have to do any protocol mapping or something like that. If we have, thank you. If we have similar, if you use the same user entity that is connected to the respective realm here. So that's one of the great features, and that's why what I think is really brilliant for our situation, as we can't use all like only SAML in a Domino environment to hook all services up to that. Keycloak helps us a lot with that, as it traverses these two authentication protocols dynamically for us without us having to do anything on the application side to handle it. So that was that part. Third part in our authorization chain that I wanted to show you today is the AppDev pack. As I said, we have different applications that are different application that talks through a Node.js middleware through the put on task to Domino, and it uses the OIDC flow as well. And so far in the what HCL is giving you today, you have to have the IAM component installed to make that happen. But with this little configuration, which we can also make use of Keycloak for that. And that's basically in this client definition in here. So this is the same thing as we've seen it for for the Domino REST APIs. We have an OpenID Connect definition. The only thing that is changing a little bit is we have a so-called client scope. So the app dev pack needs to know the node's username and the technical username that we want to use for this user interaction. And we have to give that over to it to pass it in the token so that the Proton task can actually see, okay, so this is the user that actually authenticated against the IDP, and this is the technical user that I could use, that I should use to make those things work. And in Keycloak, these definitions are done through so-called client scopes, and in our case, this is a piece of a scope definition that goes into the respective JWT token that gets passed on to the Proton task later on. And there are two so-called attribute mappers that we define in here. This is the Proton functional ID, which is in our case a static text that defines the technical user that the Proton task is using to interact with the databases. And the second one is the node's distinguished name, which is a user attribute coming from LDAP, which is in our case the full name field coming through the LDAP directory. So both of these entries are getting mapped into the respective access token, and this allows the app dev pack to see, okay, so it's this user and that technical user, and then off we go and we do our integration work. And as I said, these are the client mappers that I showed you for a minute ago. And yeah, these are those two. And then we have to define our endpoints. And as you for those of you who are familiar with the app dev pack, inside of the app dev pack, there's we have to define the IDP introspection endpoints in the OAuth token store. These can be imported through a Domino server console command that is inside of the app dev pack definitions, but basically it defines in this pretty much the same way we define a we define a client ID, we define a client secret. These are the two parameters that are coming from the Keycloak definitions in the client itself. That's what we have here. So this is the client ID that we have here, and then we have, as I said, described earlier on, the client secret that gets generated. So that part goes over to into this session, and then we have to define an introspection URL. This is for the Proton tasks. So when an access token gets pushed over to the Proton task through the API, the Proton task then evaluates this token against an introspection URL from the IDP and asks the IDP, okay, is this a valid token? Is it coming from you? Is that okay? And if the IDP says yes, that's fine, then it carries on. And this is what we do right here. So we have an introspection URI that's going in here, and this is the one that this basic introspection URI that Keycloak is giving us for the OpenID token introspection for our specific run that we have here. So this has to go in here, and then the connection is closed, and the app dev pack is making use of that part as well, of Keycloak as well. Sorry about that. There's one little nugget inside of the app dev pack, and I was talking to the developer of this one with HCL a couple of, like yesterday, I think, about the Keycloak integration. This is the app dev pack DSAPI filter. This DSAPI filter allows you to define your own OIDC flows and authorizations, or two authorizations for Domino HTTP endpoints and REST APIs that you might have. For that, you define your application definitions in the app dev pack configuration database. You define scopes, and then you do pretty much the same thing as we have seen earlier on in in that screen for the basic Proton task, you also define in the OAuth token store for your own applications. You define a respective introspection and credential way forward for that. And that's what we have defined in here as well. So this part is, where am I? Where's my PowerPoint? Right here. So this allows us to also make use of the SRP filter that the AppDev brings us and authenticate not only against IAM, but against Keycloak as well. The ADP, the AppDev pack, the SRP filter has a nice functionality to push over these definitions from ADP config directly over to the configuration in IAM. That's something we don't have in Keycloak. So in Keycloak, we have to do that manually, but that's not a big deal. So that's pretty much comes down to the same client definitions that we've seen for the AppDev pack itself. So that's only that has to be done once, and then pretty much you're good to go. For those of you who don't know this, who don't know this feature, I have that in here. There's the OAuth 2 definitions, and this, for example, are the OAuth 2 definitions for a specific scope that I have defined for this URL pattern here. And the SRP filter will apply this configuration and this scope definition to these URLs that are coming into the HTTP server. So whenever something is calling comes in calling this API, this URL pattern, there's the SRP filter will look for an access token, evaluate it against the IDP, and then allow the access accordingly. So that's the definition right here. And it will also do something. It will do scope checking, so I can have scopes defined. So I'll have to have a scope inside of my access token that's in this called views API. If I don't have that, and if I have a valid access token, I still don't get access to the resources. So this is an additional layer of security that can be configured inside of this this SRP filter, which is coming in pretty handy to add an additional layer of security in front of a REST API, for example, that you might have been building with maybe XPages, an XAgent or whatever, or even with a Java servlet on the Domino server side. So everything that's accessible through a URL handler can make use of this. And I think it's a pretty darn underestimated feature or underappreciated feature that is built around in the app with the AppDev pack. As I mentioned, there's something coming to 12.02. The NOOP will support a OIDC or authentication directly, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. And what this implementation in 12.02 does not support is especially these kind of scope checks that are available through the AppDev pack, the SRP filter. This is not yet part of the first implementation that we'll see in 12.02 for the NOOP, but it is if you need that and you can't work with that stuff that's in the NOOP. So there's still the opportunity to switch back to the AppDev pack and the SRP filter to make use of these special security features that we have in here. So for the NOOP, we will have to do something similar than we did with the SAML providers. There's a new, inside of the IDP catalog, there's a new form coming up, which looks like this. It's an OIDC provider that we have to define. In this case, this is our Keycloak server that we want to talk to. Also, we have to define the root certificates that are for the SSL certificates. So we are able to make an SSL handshake. And then we have to define another client implementation in Keycloak that is using OpenID Connect as the client protocol and the access type of confidential. A couple of other settings, but this is also very well documented in the NOOP configuration. And then we're off to go. And now let's just take a look at the integrated demo with that. Let me quit my Firefox right here and start it up again. To see all of these things in action. As we mentioned before, let's get started with this is our application authenticating against Keycloak using OIDC. You see that up here. The protocol is OpenID Connect. This is a single page application that talks through the app dev pack with Domino, brings in some Domino data and stuff like that. So with that, we're authenticating against Keycloak, and we're using a OAuth authentication to an OIDC connection through the app dev pack to talk to a nodes database. The next thing that I showed you is the same kind of application, but working with the Domino REST APIs. So this also accesses the Domino server, and you see here this is the same server, and from the URL perspective, and it pretty much does the same thing. So next thing is we're connected with OIDC in both cases. Now let's switch over to my mail, so the worst part. And then you saw flickering here where you say, okay, we have this protocol transformation, and this is now the transfer over to the SAML authentication part. So with this client, we're SAML authenticated. The next one over here is my Domino address book on the Danube server. So with this one here, this application uses OIDC native authentication against the Domino server, also in a single sign-on environment, because we're already logged into these ones with using OIDC. The same access token goes on for this one here. And you see this is a different server, so we really have single sign-on across different servers as well. And of course, we can do the same thing with the Next Pages application, for example. So that's working fine. This is using the SAML part again. And then the last thing is I also have HCL Nomad Web configured using the SAML authentication. So I can start that one up as well. And here we go. This is Nomad Web using SAML authentication against Keycloak. And this is the same database that we saw early on in the demo, the IDP catalog, just used by Nomad Web. So of course we could include the nodes client here as well, but I think that covers a little bit of how this interaction is working out. Just for reference here, these are the applications that I talked about, or the components that it uses. The first application is using the REST APIs through OIDC to hook up to Domino. The second one was the app dev pack configuration, app dev pack application using OIDC. The third one was Mailverse. It uses SAML. The fourth one was the address book part. It uses OIDC native against the Danube server. And the fifth one is using X Pages, and in this case could be SAML or OIDC, depending on what the Domino server is configured for. So both ways would be possible. If we have a Danube server in that space, we could use the OIDC connection for that directly as well. And then it's the last piece is Nomad Web that we had, and this is using SAML, the SAML authentication for that piece as well. For the developers in the house, so I brought in some sample code on how to interact from an authentication point of view with Keycloak. And the great thing, as I mentioned, is Keycloak is 100% standard compliance regarding OIDC, OAuth, and SAML. So what we can do basically is, in contrast, for example, in the app dev pack, where we had these proprietary Node.js modules to work with IAM. This one here allows us to use standard OAuth2 or OIDC client packages for Node.js and for other platforms as well, right? So it's not only Node.js, but in my case, as I said, I'm most of the time I'm working using JavaScript frameworks. That's why I pulled in those ones. The Java guys might bear with me. They have similar tool sets at their disposal. So what I wanted to point out is this is a client code when I call the authentication endpoint of a REST API in Node.js. I more or less use an OpenID standard client to define the call to the IDP, which is done in this authorization URI variable. And we have then whenever we come back from the IDP, we have a so-called callback that then gets called, and this callback then handles the token management. And the cool thing is this is the respective callback method that the callback function that I have in here. And the great thing for me with working with Keycloak here in a standard fashion, in the standard way, was that I could use these two functions without changes using the ActivePack and the Domino REST APIs. There was no change whatsoever in this code for my middleware that I needed to call these features, and that's a great thing. I think from a standardization point of view, I don't have anything specific that is Domino specific to do authentication, but I'm using standard OIDC flows and standard OIDC software components that work against every other environment. So I don't have to be bothering about any Domino specifics here to do the authentication part. And that's great for application developers, because a lot of the web developer guys that I'm working with have no idea how Domino is working and what Domino is doing. They just want to call some APIs and get some data in and out of it, but they basically don't care about all the specifics that we still have here for reference, like LTPA tokens and whatnot. This is something that's simply not needed anymore. I left it here for reference today, but this is something that, luckily enough, with all that settings, has gone away. And this allows people to work with these APIs and to work against Domino that don't have a clue on how security is implemented in Domino. They don't have to know. They can just work with standard functions out of the box. So this is the big picture that I wanted to show you today about Keycloak and Domino, and go into some of the specifics here. But Keycloak doesn't, of course, stop here. Keycloak is a very versatile IDP, and it brings in a lot more to the table. And what I really recommend, there's a great document from HCL that tells us how to define single sign-on between connections, same time Domino, and also that's also applicable to the DX and the commerce environment that HCL has regarding Keycloak. So not only gives Keycloak allows us to bridge all the authentication gaps that we have in interaction with Domino, but it also allows us to build a greater picture and to integrate the whole digital solutions suite into one authentication mechanism and one tool to rule them all, so to speak. A lot of other IDPs do that as well, but Keycloak is especially good at that as well. And of course, Keycloak can work with a lot more systems. Being it hosted systems, being it SaaS solutions, being it everything that's configurable using OIDC and SAML in a standard way can be hooked up into these SSO in such an SSO environment. Another thing that I think is really great in Keycloak is the way that more modern authentication mechanisms like are handled, especially multi-factor authentication and step-up authentication. So that's something that Keycloak also supports out of the box. So relatively simple configurational flow adoption in Keycloak. I can define .p configurations or multi-factor authentications for specific clients, and not only for specific clients and realms, but I can also define on business rules when do I want to have a multi-factor authentication, when do I not need one. Special use case for me is always, I had a couple of customers that asked me to implement multi-factor authentication when people are working from home or from remote or from internet cafes, but please don't let us have multi-factor authentication when they're working on the intranet or through the VPN configuration. All that is doable out of the box with Keycloak. Next thing is was interesting for me in a couple of API situations that I had to build is step-up authentication. So imagine you have logged in into Keycloak, and you get a set of basic parameters for a specific client definition, and for specific functions in your on your IDP, or for specific functions inside of your API, for example, you need a separate authentication. So you want to make sure that people are not only authenticated with user ID and password, but you want to ask them in a specific situation where they, for example, want to delete data from your database. You ask them for an additional layer of security and ask them for another multi-factor or second or third factor of authentication before you actually execute the API call that the user was requesting. So that's also something that Keycloak is capable of doing. So your API can, for example, examine the token, and if a certain scope is missing, then it can request a step-up authentication where the user has to come up with an additional factor of authentication, and then the token gets enriched with a specific scope, for example, that allows you to do the requested API call. So situations like this for a programmer are very handy as well, and Keycloak supports these configurations as well. And the last, and also one of the things that I like a lot about Keycloak is the identity brokering capabilities it brings to the table. So what's identity brokering? An identity broker is basically a traversal system that allows one identity to be mapped into another one. For example, if you have, or a lot of my customers have a Microsoft 365 environment, so they authenticate through their Windows machines directly with Microsoft 365. They have Outlook and Teams and whatnot, and they all are sharing their digital identity on Active Directory, on Azure Active Directory. So if they want to access Domino resources, how would we do that? And Keycloak can help us in that case. As I mentioned, we can have various user repositories that Keycloak can hook up to. But what Keycloak can also define is if, for example, a user is authenticated against AAD and brings in an access token when it hits a Keycloak security endpoint that Domino is requesting, Keycloak can transfer the Microsoft identity into a Keycloak identity and automatically reroute the call back to the application. So the user is more or less seamlessly authenticated, even though they never really authenticate against Keycloak itself, but through a trust relationship between other IDPs, between multiple IDPs, you can more or less generate the respective access tokens for a user mapping. And that's basically what you have to do with an identity brokering. There's a lot more to it, but like in a nutshell, you define a trust relationship between IDPs. That could be, for example, an Azure AD implementation. It could be an Okta service. It could be whatever else on an LDAP system or whatever else, or whatever other IDP is out there that supports SAML and OIDC. And with this trust, you also define a mapping rule so that Keycloak knows, okay, when this token arrives from that IDP that I trust, then I find the respective user in a certain attribute into that token, and then I can map this against, for example, our Domino LDAP against with a traversal rule for example, compute the full name and stuff like that to be able to identify the user on the Domino side. And then the respective tokens for the Domino part would be issued, handed back to the application, and access is granted, given the fact that the user has access on the Domino side, of course. As I said, this can be in the most of the use cases that I have for that is integrating with the Microsoft world on a very high-level basis. So we don't have to synchronize anything. We just do more or less a mapping of identities. And but this could be like any other IDP outside of Keycloak. And this is something that also is coming with Keycloak out of the box and can be made use of, and also gives you a central point of how to configure these interactions regarding authentication, authorization, for your whole environment, right? Because as soon as you have Keycloak configured for a lot of other systems as well, these traversals will be working for all other systems, not only Domino as well, that are configured to Keycloak. So to summarize that, what's the take that I'm in my hopefully somewhat interesting discussion and talk here I've done today. Keycloak, from my perspective, covers all angles regarding single sign-on questions that I might have inside of the HCL Digital Solutions portfolio and outside. Especially with the identity brokering capabilities, you can build very complex but very very robust and very well integrated single sign-on environments in heterogeneous environments as well. What I find from a Domino perspective, I find brilliant is the mapping between the SAML and OIDC protocol. That is just like more or less transparently happening behind the covers without us having to do anything. What I didn't mention is the extensibility of Keycloak. So whatever component is missing, you can build your own or you can configure your own. So there's lots of configuration options, lots of extensibility options. And it's an open source project, right? So you can participate, you can contribute back. It's a great environment, and it's a very, very robust, very large, very stable community behind this product. Also, there are lots of service providers that can help you get your feet wet with Keycloak. As I mentioned, it's one of the most widely used IDP environments that I see in the marketplace. So there's lots of people doing cloud hosting, software as a service components, and also helping with on-premises implementations of it. There's great documentation out there. There's lots and lots of educational material out there. So it's really easy to get into that material. And if you're stuck at some point, there's lots of help out there, being in the community, but also a lot of service providers that are out there helping implementing this solution. As I also mentioned, Keycloak is not only like a single server box that runs somewhere, it's also completely available in high availability scenarios, failover, load balancing scenarios. So it's built with enterprise grade capabilities in mind. And this goes as well for all the on-prem implementations and also the SaaS implementations. And as I said, a lot of the stuff I only mentioned briefly, like the WebAuthn functionality, the multi-factor configurations and all those kind of things. Keycloak brings a lot more than just single sign-on with user ID and password to the table. And also it takes a lot of burden away from my perspective, from the Domino world, where we have to play catch up with all these new and modern authentication mechanisms that are out there. We know how that this is not an easy task also for the Domino development environment to really keep up with that. With regards to the rest of the digital solutions portfolio, I think that's the same thing. And Keycloak in that specific area they're specializing on exactly that, right? So they only do authentication, authorization, identity brokering, all those kind of things, and they do it on a high high level, and they do it on a great level of perfection, and they basically support everything pretty soon that's coming out. So you really get somebody who's specialized in that, and this takes, from my perspective, a lot of burden away from a Domino administrator and also from a digital solutions administrator portfolio. So you can be sure you're running a product that is secure, stable, and reliable, and offers you a lot of the basic or the latest security features and functions that are out there in the market. And for example, with multi-factor authentication, that's a thing that you define centrally in Keycloak. You don't have to define it for Domino. You don't have to define it for Verse. You don't have to define it for connections. You don't have to define it for, you name it. It's done once and it's working for all. And it's working rule-based. So if you want to have a service that doesn't need multi-factor, that's fine. You can configure that. If you want to have it across the board, you can do that. So there's a lot of flexibility in there, which is totally not related to whatever features that each individual product gives you. And this is something that I like a lot. So that's all I have today. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to go through the questions. And
yeah, why don't you forward ahead in the slides to the question panel there, or anything else that you've got to share in your deck, but let's just stay on your deck. No, perfect. Let's go back to the questions there. Thank you, Heiko. That was fantastic. And I felt very much, as I have with other things that you and I have done before, like I had a fire hose pointed at my head and was doing my best to try and drink as fast as I could. So this, if anything for me, and I'm gonna get Jesse to jump in too here on your comment, but for me, the thing that you said right at the end, right? That Keycloak is not something that's brand new, not something that is, you know, just somebody working out of their garage. It's standards based, lots of support, lots of education, lots of material to be able to learn it. That for me is with anything that I want to try and bring into a Domino environment is the biggest challenge with like this big black box that feels like a blob that I'm never going to be able to get my arms around. So it almost feels like we want to do some kind of a little cookbook perhaps on the right resources to use and the right steps to follow. But how long, I'll start by asking, how long did it take you to kind of noodle this out and get it working for you?
Actually, it wasn't that hard. I mean, as I said, there's lots of material out there. The biggest issue, more or less, was to gather all the information and grab it on. So from like the first to hook up Domino with SAML and OIDC now and with the AppDev pack and all those kind of things to Keycloak, I think it was like a week or so that we took. But then, of course, you branch out and then you're going to go, okay, so Keycloak offers me like the identity brokering piece, which is a complex matter on its own. And then you take a look at, for example, on, okay, so now I have one Keycloak server. So how do I scale that? So what if that one goes down? Because if that's going down, nobody is able to log into my systems anymore, right? So I have to make sure that this is at least redundant. And this is another topic on its own, where you get into things like containerization and whatnot. So that took a while longer. So overall, to maybe feel confident with it from a consulting point of view, I would say, but for us, it was about half a year or so, really, where we had our own team sitting on it, implementing things, and solving a lot of basic basic tasks, so to speak. to make that work in a repeatable fashion, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So just jumping back into the questions here. Dave Kern has joined the presentation, has just been making some comments as we go along. I wanted to maybe come back to your reference to maybe while we're doing questions here, if you could go back into your slides and grab that PDF, that URL that has the documentation that you referenced, and put that into the chat for everybody to see, and we'll make sure that we highlight it as well.
So
that one there, yeah. If you can grab that to share. And I also want to touch, Maximilian and Lars both shared that they had a challenge seeing the screen as you were going through the demo. So thank you guys for that feedback. Obviously the slides will be available to be downloaded. I'd be interested if you guys could take a look at the YouTube video once it's posted and see if that makes a difference for you, and give us that feedback. But that's something that we'll take for future presenters on just managing resolution of screens as we go through the presentations. Okay, thank you. You put you put that into organizers and panelists. Can you put it into all?
Yeah.
Okay, so Maximilian asked another question, which is, where can I find the documentation on how to set it up? I'm assuming that there must be a Keycloak website of some sort.
Yes, there's a Keycloak website. I can post that into the material as well. And then there's also for each individual products that I mentioned, like there's a documentation for setting up Keycloak and the REST APIs, which is in the HCL REST APIs documentation. Then there's for the noob, the OIDC configuration with Keycloak is also in the HCL documentation. The SAML part is, I think there's a couple of articles out there, but this is also very well described in the HCL documentation. So most of those things are more or less a Google away.
Yeah. Okay.
But we can definitely come up with a summary of links that help people along with that.
Well, and I know we haven't nailed things down yet, but we've been having conversations with Dave about a future OpenNTF webinar, so keep your eyes posted for that. Okay, Dennis has posted a question here. It says, does the SAML connection from the beginning of the talk require a provisioning of the users in the IDP to Domino?
Well, let me go into the Keycloak definitions here. So, as I mentioned, we have a user federation. Can you still see my screen here, right?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So
you might want to actually, you know what, Heiko, if you could just in your browser zoom it in a little bit. There you go. Thank you.
Okay. So this defines, for example, our LDAP definitions that we did for Domino. So we basically used we went that route to say we don't create any users inside of Keycloak itself from scratch, but we hooked up the user federation to Domino LDAP, and as soon as as the user authenticates for the first time, the user objects will automatically get created in Keycloak, right? So we don't have to do anything about that.
So I think based on Dennis's question, because it's a two-parter, it says how does the ACL work if we can't add users in the ACL? Is there a SAML assertion like scopes and JWT to do that outside of the database ACL? I think that's unless I'm misinterpreting it, that's not the case, right? We're saying create the users in Domino, manage the users in Domino, update the ACLs all you want, groups, all the rest of it. It's all Domino security. Keycloak just sits in front of it.
Right, exactly. So Keycloak doesn't do anything with the ACLs, and also I can resemble to the question. There is Keycloak offers you also to create users, so you can register users. Keycloak not only gives you a configuration to authenticate, but it also gives you the opportunity to have a web dialog to register users. And this one has an API and a couple of events that can be triggered. And for example, we're currently building something like this with the Domino REST APIs, which gives us access to the Domino registration classes, so we can with that, for example, also like register users and even create users, including IDs and stuff like that. So that would be doable.
Yeah.
If that was the case, if that was the question. So it's not part of it, because, well, how users get created in Domino is not something that Keycloak is actually interested in. It registers a user in its own repository, but there's an event hook to it. So you can, for example, say, okay, if a new user got created, I'm going to pick up this information and do something with it. And for example, do an API call on the Domino side to register the user there as well, or to write it into a specific address book or whatever, right? If I have directory assistance configured, this also applies here. So it depends on the use case, but yes, you can extend that to also make user registration possible through Keycloak. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, for me, the important thing about all of this, you know, it's one thing to say, here's how you do it, and there's all of these different options in terms of the flexibility to be able to build whatever it is that you want to build. But what you said in terms of it depends on your use case, and I'll take even one step further, and that is, and you covered this at the beginning of your presentation, the whole idea is that we've got conceptually, we're talking about building applications that integrate with Domino and other tools. So if you were just a Domino shop, you really wouldn't necessarily worry about this too much. It's more a matter of saying, okay, in a larger landscape, this manages a whole bunch of interaction between various different systems and applications, and lets you manage your access, you know, with just one solution.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, there is basically, if you're hooking up, for example, a standard LDAP directory with Keycloak, you can synchronize these the users when they get created into the LDAP. So, for example, for a connections implementation that not uses Domino but something standard as its repository, this can be hooked up in a bidirectional way. In the Domino case, we can't do that because the LDAP entry alone doesn't really help you much necessarily, because you need to make group entries, you need to do maybe even create an ID file for it and stuff like that. So there's a bit more to it, because that's what Domino gets a little bit special in my occasion. But for other systems, this can be done and automated through what Keycloak delivers out of the box.
Okay, Dennis put in another question. I think it's a good question. Is it possible to use the external IDP users in Domino without provisioning them first in Domino?
No, because you have to have a user object in Domino, because as we know, in Domino, there's always has to be something in the address book to be make use in the ACLs, right? So there's no way that you can have something that only exists in the Microsoft world, which is not in any case can be resorted on the Domino side. It always is a mapping. So you have to have the user provisioned on the Domino side, have it in your groups, have it in your ECLs, and all those kind of things. There's no way around that.
Okay, that's all we have for questions. So with that, I think we'll say thank you and wrap it up. That was a good job, Heiko. For everybody's information, as I said before, we're going to post this up to our YouTube channel and have the slides available for download. And thank you very much. We'll plan to see you in December for our holiday gathering before Christmas. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you, Heiko.
Thank you.